Hi, Fede from Pracademy here. We are saying hello from a very special place actually. This is Deer Park in Sarnath, northern India. This is the place that actually 2,500 years ago, the Buddha and some of his very early students sat down and executed the very first mindfulness workshop, basically. They got together and they discussed and practiced why it's so important to focus on our breath, right? And why our mind wanders sometimes and why we need to bring it back to our breath. And how important it is to be aware of our body and our surroundings, etc., etc. So this is the birthplace of the mindfulness revolution, basically. I'll show you around very quickly. It's a beautiful place. There's a lot of monks chanting and meditating all around this very special place. I'm super excited. Lots of energy around here. And it's the best place, I would think, to introduce our new methodology at Pracademy, compassionate innovation. So what's this compassionate innovation thing? Well, it's an innovation methodology that focuses particularly on alleviating human suffering. It's a mix of what we traditionally know as design thinking, but we also include mindfulness techniques and compassion studies, right? So how does it really work? Well, we begin with something that we call searching for suffering, right? We go out into the world and similarly as we do in design thinking, we put on our anthropological hat, but in this case we also put on our mindful hat. We literally explore the world and ask ourselves, where is there suffering? Where is there human beings needing to alleviate their suffering, right? This could include so many different places, right? This could include hospitals. This could include very poor parts of the world, institutions that treat mental illnesses, right? This could include centers for drug dependency rehabilitation. This could include the environment in which nonprofits and many governments work in, for example, with the reception of refugees. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. The focus is to really try to pinpoint particular situations where humans are really suffering. And then, of course, put on our creative hats to serve and to alleviate that suffering. So once we've done our search and we've pinpointed a particular area that we want to focus on, we spend a lot of time going through compassion meditation techniques to expand basically our sensitivity and our ability to understand and to connect with those who are suffering. The key here is that there's a big difference between compassion and empathy, right? Empathy is simply feeling what other people feel. Compassion is feeling what other people feel, particularly when they're suffering, and then become empowered to do something about it, right? To become focused on alleviating that suffering, right? So to tell you a quick story, imagine that there's a monk walking through the mountains of Tibet, right? And suddenly that monk comes across another monk. And that other monk has a very big rock on top of his chest. He can't move, he can barely breathe, right? And that initial monk, if he only had empathy, he would also be feeling the pain of the rock on top of his chest. And he would also feel that he couldn't breathe, right? But fortunately, that monk was able to not only be empathetic, but also compassionate. And as soon as he started to feel the pain of the other monk, he became empowered to take that rock off of the chest of the monk in pain and alleviate that situation, right? So compassion is a very embodied sense of empathy. It's an empowered sense of empathy. And the reason why that's so important is because it helps us to prevent something that we call empathy fatigue, which happens a lot in, for example, healthcare environments, where nurses are engaged in such difficult situations being involved with people who are suffering all the time, that they become overwhelmed, right? They become many times overpowered, right, and fatigued with the exposure of constant suffering. And so what compassion does, particularly through compassion meditation techniques, is that it helps us become empowered, right? It gives us that ability to separate ourselves in an empowered way from that pain in order to jump in with help, right? Once we've been able to really connect with the individual and the kinds of individuals suffering, right, we move on to really defining what the problem is. So we ask ourselves, one, why is that person suffering really? Right? By using a lot of the techniques that we've already developed as design thinkers, we ask ourselves, what is the root cause of that suffering, right? And to do so, of course, we study what suffering really means and how compassion can help around that. And once we've pinpointed this, we also define the user very, very specifically, as we do as well in design thinking, and then we move on to what are the needs of that person suffering, right? Once we've defined that particular compassion point of view, then we move on to coming up with as many creative ideas as possible to solve and to relieve that suffering, right? And of course, as quickly as we come up with ideas, we need to make them real, we need to rapid prototype them, and so we bring them into the real world as quickly and as cheaply as possible in order to expose those prototypes to those particular people who are going through a tough time. And of course, we expose these prototypes to a lot of other stakeholders, like, for example, the family members of the person who are suffering, who of course are always very, very important. We expose this to experts in, for example, the healthcare field, or experts in social work to get their input and feedback as well, right? And then eventually we test these solutions. Once we feel that they are appropriate enough to be able to be tested in the field, we do compassionate testing. And here as well, there's a difference with design thinking where we need to be much more mindful, careful, and particularly respectful of our users in the testing phase. And we spend a lot of time also discussing ethics, right? How is ethics involved when it comes to testing these prototypes on our users who are going through, of course, a tough time? So that's the methodology we'll be experimenting and prototyping during the coming months, right? Why do we think this is so important? Well, I personally really think that innovation is in many ways going in the wrong direction. Think about all these crazy solutions that are coming out of Silicon Valley, right? How many photo sharing apps do we really need? Do we need an app to get our coffee served in a faster fashion, right? Or how many dating apps do we need? Or there's just so much irrelevant innovation of people dedicating a lot of talent towards things that I personally think that are not so necessary in the world, right? That's point one. Point two, I also think that there are a lot of innovations in the world that are very harmful. Just think about financial innovation and financial engineering, right? All the mess that has created in the financial world and the pain and suffering that it has brought onto countless of families around the world, right? Also think about innovation around like the military industrial complex and making faster and more hurtful weapons, right? That kind of innovation is not very needed in this world, and so hopefully compassionate innovation will help young, energetic, innovative individuals dedicate their energies and their passions and their excitement towards solutions and products and services that can really have an impact on helping people live much, much better lives, free from suffering, free from pain, and free from situations that none of us want to be in.